Hello, everyone. Welcome to another IT career talk with professionals. And today we have an executive director. So, my guest today is Miss Katrina Chan. Hello, Miss Katrina.
Hi, Rafael, and hello, audience. How are you? I hope everyone's staying safe and doing well today.
I'm doing great now, and I believe our audience hopefully are also doing great as well. Right. So let's kickstart it by asking you to describe your role. Especially, you have a very unique role. I think you hold this role for two companies, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. So I'm the executive director at IdeaSpace Foundation and Kubo. So an executive director is pretty much like I guess a CEO or a managing director type role, but in typically in parang nonprofits or platforms or organizations like what we have. Um, so fun fact, like I actually started IdeaSpace as an intern many years ago. So IdeaSpace turning 10 next year. And it's actually one of the first startup incubators slash accelerators in the Philippines. Um, and then about 5 years ago, so in 2016, I actually co-founded and started Cuba Innovation Hub, which is a public-private initiative. Similar to IdeaSpace in the sense that it works with tech startups, but also working with the government now to look at the entire ecosystem apart from, I guess, the incubation acceleration that we do at IdeaSpace. So, um, so basically, I head both organizations now. I kind of moved my way up, I guess, from intern to executive director. But it's we're currently a team of close to 30 people. I think we're the largest organization in the Philippines, and we work with over 500 tech startup companies. I'm very happy to say, all building fantastic companies in the tech space. So again, really happy to be here, Raf, and kind of share a bit more about my experience.
Right, right. So, what are the skills required? No? Your skills, maybe values that you need to have to become an executive director.
Actually, I think a lot of it does have to do with more soft skills than hard skills at this point. Um, I guess a lot of at Cuba especially we like to say and what we it's all about the Bahay Cuba, diba? The
Mm.
bayanihan. So I think getting to this level, like some of the things that you have to look at are you know how do the different pieces work together, right? So in building a startup, it's not just looking at one startup investment in isolation, but also seeing what connections can be made among our different partners and stakeholders. Of course, bringing those partners and stakeholders in, and also evangelizing about the potential of the tech startup scene in the Philippines. So, like I think the opportunity in tech startups is undeniable at this point. It's not just a niche thing. I think out of the 10 most valuable companies in the world, nine of them are, tech startups, built within this lifetime, right?
Correct, correct.
So, um, it's really just a matter of, when we're able to kind of really build on this and make it part of our capability as a nation and also support, right, the companies that are growing out of the Philippines. So, yeah, so I guess that's definitely one thing to answer your question, like being able to connect the dots,
Mhm.
human switchboard, like network. Of course, the leadership aspect of it, right? And really leading a team. I guess at some level, like I'm not a coder, as you'll find out more soon enough. I'm not a lawyer, but and there's so many skills needed to be able to bring this community together and just kind of, being the conductor in that whole process is quite important. And I suppose a little bit of it is also sort of just luck and intuition that comes with experience. You hear, 100 pitches or so a year, then you start to get some sense, right, of the pulse of both what the market is offering, what startups are working on, and also, what's out there and what's getting invested in and what the trends are. And yeah, I guess these are some of the things that become increasingly important when you're doing my role, I suppose.
Right, right. And if I can ask now, managing, I would say, in incubees is I think that's the right term. No? How different is that versus, let's say, managing employees? No? Is there a different
Yeah, of
management
course.
style to that? Like, are you more stricter or more flexible to employees versus incubees?
So I think the term's actually incubatees, but yes,
Incubatees. Okay, all right, thank
yeah.
you.
So okay, so definitely, like I would say, definitely with my team, I'm much more hands-on, right? Like, you have to be like you're accountable for everything that the buck stops with you, right? Like when it
Mhm.
comes to your own team. But I guess the difference really is at the end of the day, like, and I tell our team this also, it's it's the startup founder's business, right? Like as much as we think we know better, or we're there to guide them, to advise them, to help them make connections, right? But at the end of the day, it's still the founder's business to run. Like they have to have the final decision on what's gonna happen to their business and where they want to take it.
Right.
So um of course, like in some ways you might say we're more strict, especially if we invest in a company and actually have equity. Then like there is that responsibility at the governance level, because you're a part owner in that company, that you have to make sure that they're reporting everything that to the extent that's typically expected. But for the most part, yeah, for the startups or the incubatees, a lot of it has to do with providing guidance. But at the end of the day, like they make the decisions on what they want, where they want to take their company and what they want to do with it, right? As opposed to with employees, where internally you're setting that direction together, and the way that they're accountable to the company is very different, as opposed to if it's again someone else's company or
Mhm.
business.
Right, right. No. But you mentioned a while ago that, funny enough that you weren't as hands-on coding wise, no? Um, but maybe you can explain or expound more on your coding history. What languages do you play around with, and does that take into account when you're looking at your startups that you would incubate?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I'm not a coder. I'm actually feel a bit out of place in the title that's up here, like young CTO. So I'm not a CTO actually. I did learn how to code. I went to school in Carnegie Mellon, which is a big CS school. So everyone was required to learn how to code there actually. Like even if you were a philosophy major or something, kailangan marunong ka pa rin mag-code.
Right, right.
So back then, I'm not gonna. I guess I learned a bit of C and Java, but I guess more recently, like I have been playing around a bit, like in my own time. Like I try to learn Python. I do find that as I evaluate companies or look at the composition of the team, it is important to have someone there that has that solid tech background. The ability to implement, as opposed to yourself, as opposed to being reliant on outsourcing your code if you're a small company is so important. But I will also say that a lot of our successful CEOs, they're not actually coders, right? Like they have a great partner in a good CTO, but I do think that it's important for founders, and I also kind of hold myself to this, to have some knowledge of coding and how the structure, how the thinking goes behind the like programming, right? So, and I guess from what I've observed recently, yeah, I'm having fun right now playing with like Swift playgrounds and stuff like that. I think even relatively simple languages like these are pretty good to learn. Like Python's another one I'm seeing, especially because of the data science sort of AI stuff that's picking up, and definitely a lot of front end things, right? Like so JavaScript and Node and like that whole kind of stuff. I think it's good to have a working knowledge of it as a CEO, but I'm definitely not gonna dock points against you if like you're a founder and you're not a coder, just because you know again the skill sets sort of complement each other, and it's good to have a working knowledge of it. But I don't think it's super necessary to be a 10x coder to succeed as a startup founder.
Right, right. Let's pause a bit on this now. And you mentioned where you studied. So we wanna ask you, why you picked that school and even why you picked your course. So just to kick it off, maybe you can just mention to our audience what's your course and how did you pick that course?
Sure. So I studied. I have a double major in material science and engineering and business. So I think I lucked out, where I'm kind of doing still a bit of both, right? Like, or I guess maybe even then I was a bit confused about which side I wanted to do. Like, and I get to fortunately sort of apply both kind of worlds in my current work, since I get to work with a lot of tech companies, mostly on their business stuff, right? But yeah, I guess in terms of school selection, um, yeah, I in high school I actually went to Philippine Science High School. Again, maybe it was another one of those required things, but we actually have a bond. So if you don't take like a STEM course in college, you have to pay back the
Correct.
government for everything that they did for you, right? So and honestly, I was interested in the STEM field, right? So it wasn't like a difficult choice to I mean, I always felt like that's where the future was headed. Both my parents are actually lawyers, so they were kind of against this. Like, they really
Mm,
wanted me to take up law.
really?
Um,
Mm-mm.
yeah, but there was a part of me that felt like, if I wanted to either build something myself, or um, at least understand how the world works in that sense, and it always appealed to me. Um, so yeah, but I guess I was on the fence whether I felt like I could make more impact on the business side or sort of the building side. So yeah, like, I chose Carnegie Mellon because I actually knew some people that had graduated from there. I mean, I found the tech background of the school particularly impressive, and then
Mm.
I got into this sort of dual major program, which is what I was really looking to do. So yeah, I guess that's how I ended up there. And then for my specific course, um, at Carnegie Mellon, you could actually kind of apply as a sort of more general engineering kind of student, and then choose later on which form of engineering you wanted to specialize in. I guess funny enough, I actually picked math sci because I was interested in a few things, like biomaterials, processing, and like they had this lab where you could make your own jewelry, like your
Right.
gemstones, rings, like all these things. And I was like, that seemed fun for me. I couldn't imagine myself like in a hard hat doing sites, so that took out civi. I wasn't particularly into the mechanical stuff, so that took out mechie. Like, I feel like I was some forms of engineering were a bit more appealing to me than others, and this seemed like an interesting thing, I
Mm-mm.
guess. So yeah, that's I sort of ended up there. Not quite sure. Obviously, I'm not doing material science directly now. I think to really apply yourself in that particular field, you need like a PhD or something, and you probably need to locate somewhere where there's a lot of like materials research. But like actually the N95 mask, right? Like, that's
Mm-mm.
the way that works better than all of these fibers and stuff. That's actually a very math sci kind of problem. So
Correct.
there are definitely interesting applications. But I didn't go down that path, so I can't say like I fully explored it. But yeah, I don't know. That's sort of the backstory, I guess. Very long answer to that. I
No, no.
hope.
It's fine. It's fine. And as you mentioned earlier, that school actually requires programming classes already um, in any course, right? And actually, I've read that Singapore will also introduce something similar where all courses they will have to take a 2 year programming or logic class even before their majors. So I think, do you think this is
Absolutely.
the future, or what are your thoughts on this as having programming as a core subject already, regardless of your degree?
I mean, on it, I wasn't when it was foisted upon me. I can't exactly say I was extremely happy about it. At the time, this was, like more than a decade ago now, right? So, I think it's ahead of its time in that sense. But I do think that coding or programming, or at least some intuition for algorithms, right, is a 21st century skill. You know, back then, right, like, everyone had to learn, I don't know, penmanship, right? Or even typing. Like, you don't need those courses now. Or I would even argue like, the foreign language requirement, right? Like learning a
Mm,
coding language is probably kind of fires off some set of similar neurons, right? Like, and I think communicating or interfacing with machines, right? And the way that that impacts our world is so profound now and so so ubiquitous that
right.
I don't disagree with the idea of making it a required kind of element for any learner. I would also say that it's a lot easier to kind of pick it up or get an intuition for it when you're younger. So introducing it actually at the, even at earlier levels, right, in the education system, I think is, and I mentioned Swift earlier, right? Like
Mm,
it's like you're playing a game, So um, being able to do that, like I feel like that would definitely help our workforce in the Philippines if we had more people who could just, code even a little bit, right?
right,
So
right. Interesting enough. What's your foreign language? Swift. Instead of the usual
exactly.
Japanese, German.
Yeah.
Yeah. Possible, possible. Maybe in our lifetime. The next step here usually is, picking your first career or first job. That's also one of the major milestones and decision points for anyone. How did you choose your first job?
So actually, I was sort of on a different path initially. So, but I was always pretty undecided. As I said, I could even pick one major, right?
Mm,
So I was initially thinking of going to Wall Street. So I actually did work there for a little bit. I have, and even here, like I was working a bit in sort of the banking sector, in capital markets. Um, but anyway, like I guess how I got into this field in particular, as I think I touched on this, I was actually an intern slash volunteer when IdeaSpace was still starting out.
right.
Like the founder basically told me I'm putting up the YC of the Philippines, the Y Combinator of the Philippines, which is sort of the, I guess, the most popular, the biggest accelerator based out of Silicon Valley. They have like I think 8 unicorns now or something like that, right? Graduated from there. But anyway, so my field now is it was literally like sort of my side hobby kind of thing at
Mm,
first.
mm,
I was working in an enterprise software company um, as my sort of day job, but then I got really excited, and this field is growing, so I feel like that appealed to like the millennial, fresh graduate me or young me, right? That I felt like I was part of building something that was really kind of taking off. So, over time, like maybe a year and a half later, I actually transitioned full time into working at IdeaSpace. Um, and I guess throughout that process, again, I mean, it always helps when you're interested in the field, right? So,
right.
I was always kind of attending networking events or pitch competitions or just getting to know founders and things like that, So, um, even though I wasn't officially kind of getting paid to work in this job, I was, always just kind of in that space, I
Mm,
suppose. And yeah, maybe to add a bit to that, in at least in my peers in the US, right? Like that became it was the cool thing. So I would say it, in terms of making choices, FOMO has a lot to do with, young people, right? Like
right,
and their
right.
decision making process, like who's cool or who's making money, So it wasn't, I guess the people I admired or the smartest people that I knew, they weren't going to Wall Street anymore. Like it was becoming less cool. I mean, it's still cool, right?
Mm,
To go to Wall Street or go into consulting or for McKinsey or something. But a lot of the really smart guys, they were like packing up to go to California, right? To, I don't know, work at Google or Snapchat or whatever, right? So, or if not starting their own thing completely. So, it really leaves an impression on you if like someone that was like nakachinelas and sando lang before, like suddenly raises like, I don't know, a $20 million VC round, right? Like it makes you really think about your life choices in that sense. So I feel like that definitely kind of influenced my thinking on a personal note as well.
right, right. No. And you touched a bit on this. So, in this sense, you were mentioning that the people that you admire, see, they weren't anymore going to Wall Street. They were making their own startups, getting their success somewhere else. maybe for our audience, how do you personally define success? What will make you or what makes you successful?
So, I mean, I think that's that's a difficult question to answer. Like, it's real. I think it's very personal what makes you successful. I guess from a career sense, um, the typical gauges of success definitely have something to do with sort of your annual income or how much taxes you pay, right? But I guess from a career perspective, it's really also like where are you learning, where are you growing? Like for me, that was definitely a big driver. Where am I making an impact? Where am I making a difference? I guess I am relatively kind of fortunate or privileged that I didn't have to worry about money too much. So, like what I was seeking out at that point in my life was like I felt like what I was doing wasn't just like I'm part of this kind of big meaningless machine where my ideas would go in a baol somewhere, never to be seen again. So I guess that's also a big reason why I wanted to come back to the Philippines.
Mhm.
I went home for a vacation, like I distinctly remember like I was on EDSA and the super traffic, pero I saw all of these cranes and like everything was kind of getting built, right? And I was like, what was I doing like abroad, right? Like I could be here, like I could start something, I could build something here and actually make a difference. Because like there was no kind of tech scene here, like not in the startup sense. Obviously, there's like technology companies,
Right,
right? But
right,
like
right.
that whole notion of like having an incubator and all that stuff, right? Like it wasn't such a big concept yet. So, you know, I felt like I could make a difference there. And I think that's important to a lot of, especially, like when you're young, it's really the time to kind of take these kinds of risks, right? Maybe do it because of passion or, some sense of purpose, right? Versus when you have a lot more responsibilities. But yeah, and I guess again, like how you define success when it comes to being a startup, that's also a totally different story. So
Speaking of passion, and I can see that you've been very passionate about startups, the community. How's that so far? Like, is this sometimes passion over time fades, or pick up new sections of passion? So currently, what are you passionate about?
a few things actually. I know I'm supposed to like plug at the end, but pero I think what's awesome about what I get to do or why I enjoy it is because I get to work with new founders and new startups every day. Like and in a lot of cases, I get to see them when they're still really just ideas or very early in the process, and when the startups succeed, I feel so much kind of energy from that. So I feel like that keeps the passion alive for me. And
Great, great.
I think once it gets boring, right, like I probably wouldn't do it anymore. But for now, and as because our ecosystem continues to grow, like even with COVID, right, like I think it was. I mean, obviously, like it's still difficult, like for the industry as a whole, like the economy is depressed, all of this stuff, right? But even COVID, like just the fact that I was able to see how startups were so quickly able to adapt or build solutions that are directly helping out in this crisis, like for me, that's amazing, right? Like that we're building the solutions to some of our crises or challenges right now. And, the adoption of all of these tech things, right? Like it's almost sped up by, I'd say, I don't know, half a decade, right? Like, ngayon lahat ng everyone's like sort of tita and lolas, like, you know, using some form of delivery service or I don't know, streaming content online or what have you, right?
Cashless,
So
yeah, yeah.
exactly. Um, so it's still fresh all the time, right? I guess there are certain sectors that I'm paying more attention to currently. So one of them is Startup Pinay. I do feel like there is still some problem with sort of underrepresentation of women in the tech space. It's still a very broy kind of space.
True,
I think
true.
if you ask most people, like think of a startup founder, they'll probably give you like Elon Musk or Jack Ma, right? Like you could pay them like $1,000 and they couldn't give you like a female tech founder. So yeah, little things like that, right? So Startup Pinay is probably one sort of passion project that I have currently, at least related to my field, right? And then you know, and of course Philippine Startup Week. So it's really we're organizing or we're one of the organizers of that together with DOSTDTI and DICT. But it's really a celebration of all things tech startup like in the Philippines. And again, I feel like we need that megaphone. We need opportunities to talk about. There's so many cool things happening, just no one knows about it, right?
Right,
And
right.
I would love for more people to participate in the tech startup community in general. So this is like one platform that we're really working hard on to kind of amplify that message, not just in the country, but also, of course, around the world, right?
And I'd like to add, no, I really like the startup weekend concept. I think I don't know how many years ago when I joined that. I think the it kickstarted the hackathon idea, but I still like the format of startup weekend versus other hackathon types. Just on my
Mm.
personal preference for me, I, I don't like other hackathons as much, but startup weekend for me was always like, felt like it's more aligned to creating a startup versus a hackathon where um, it's mostly about like either building a solution but not so much follow through versus the idea that after a startup weekend it really could be a real business immediately after. Anyway, that's my
And
position.
there are actually a lot. I mean, I was talking about startup week as opposed to startup weekend, but we do also organize startup weekends, right? And
Mm.
we do have quite a few success stories coming out of startup weekend. Exactly to your point, right? Where I think this orientation, well, I think what a few things that set it apart, like this orientation around the problem and really thinking about, solutions that make sense. It's not just like use this API, right? And then, that's it. Like, I think that's one part. And I think the other thing is the community that's been built around it through the years, like the network, the mentors, even the people that participate in Startup Weekend. I think they have a different type of bond also that, makes the format so successful in terms of yeah, like actually managing to build a business after the hackathon. The post hackathon part is
Right,
really
right,
the
right. um you touched a little bit about this in terms of COVID, no? And although it's not a directly related question, it's more about how has this concept of remote working affected your team, maybe also affected your startup companies as well. Maybe you can give some insights on that.
yeah, absolutely. So we conduct maybe 100 to 150 programs a year. So before, like I would say almost 100% of that was in person. And um so I think that's the biggest impact, was having to migrate everything that we used to do offline to the online formats. And kind of maintaining the value proposition, right? Like, so I mean, ever since naman, like, we were never just a co-working space. The value add was the community and all of the kind of programming, the mentors around it, right? But um so I guess the biggest loss is that sense of, like, like the spontaneous, like, oh, I attended this event and then, like, I met this investor, kind of, like that vibe that it's very difficult to replicate, like,
Right.
in the online kind of remote work version. But I guess apart from that, I would say, like, I guess we're pretty lucky. The team is relatively young and we do work in the tech industry, right? So I think we've managed to adapt a lot of it relatively well, right? And if anything, it's helped make a lot of it's helped make some of our events more inclusive, also to to non-NCR especially, right? So apart from dealing with traffic, which sucks, right? I think like to give Philippine Startup Week as an example, I think the first time we had it was like it was an in-person thing, and we had maybe 5,000 people attend. Like last year when it was fully online, we had 10,000 people attend. So, and the attendees were everywhere. If you took Garao to, like, I don't know, Holo, like there were people commenting, like, and things like that. And even being able to get mentors or experts from abroad, like they don't have to fly here anymore, right, to be able to do like a few quick mentoring sessions with some of our startups. So those are some of the positives, I suppose. But would I go back to doing in person for some of our activities? Absolutely, right? Like, I think the sense of building the community is still a bit different. Like, if you can have the occasional in person interaction.
I have my final two questions for you, no? And my first question is mostly about we understand that startups are I would say, it's tricky. It could be volatile also. So, not every startup becomes successful, unfortunately. No. How do you prepare for that, or maybe you as a incubator, as the executive director, or and how do you also prepare your founders, no, for anything like that could happen?
Um, a few things. So like, yeah, how do you deal with sort of the unexpected, the snafus, right? You
Right,
know,
right.
more startup. I mean, just by every study, right? It's kind of like more startups are unsuccessful than successful, or more don't make it than do. But I think the general principle, and like I think this is the bible of every startup, is like the lean startup, right? So this whole idea of um, basically testing very rapidly and sort of iterating through through different solutions, and learning at every step of the learning at every point in the process, right? So I guess this, my advice generally to startup founders is, yeah, don't spend like 90% of your time and effort planning and then 10% executing, because if it's like that means you have one chance, right? Like, and if you screw up, you're dead, you're out of money or whatever. So a much maybe safer method is like, to again, let the data drive you, do a lot of little tests, right? Like this idea of the MVP, the minimum viable product, is such an important part of the sort of the methodology that we apply in our accelerator program. you know and what does that mean? It means that, like as opposed to just failing once, like maybe on paper this sounds worse because you failed 10 times, right? But you're not dead yet, right? Like you fail once, you pivot a little, like you get to fail again, and you learn every time until, and hopefully your runway, your patience, your, I don't know, your sanity lasts long enough that you make it to that success point, right? But you're learning something in that process, and there are a lot more failures along the way, but it's not like the KO kind of failure, it's the I learned something and now I can move on to my next version kind of failure, which is definitely, I think also what a lot of investors like to see. And again, like if you look at I guess the successful, or the startups that get funded or ultimately kind of end up scaling up and surviving the so-called valley of death, right? Like it's not actually your high school dropout that gets it right the first time. Most of the time, it's people that have sort of grinded it out, or like, done lots of small things, right? To get to the success point. So I think the best way to deal with the unexpected is to just actually act and deal with it, as opposed to planning for it and then not, like, you know what I mean, and not kind of actually implement. Um,
Right, right,
yeah.
right.
And again,
Mm,
I also feel like this makes you a bit more resilient, like again, I mentioned earlier about COVID, and diba, some startups, they were easily able to come up with something new. I think for organizations that are set up this way, na parang yung culture nila is, we can try a new version agad, diba? Yun nga, they were able to kind of pivot their businesses a lot quicker than those that are not set up in that way, I would say.
right, right, right. And so for my final question, and to the show, no, what's your final advice, or like a summary advice to any person like who wants to pursue an IT career, or I doesn't have to be programming career, no, in the IT sector, to be a professional in the IT sector, and maybe you can also touch point on, since you mentioned, the um, what you mentioned, the Pinays, because we need more Pinays also in the IT sector. No? So what's your advice for them on generally how to be po in that sense?
How to be me po.
Or how to be in the
I'll answer that
IT
a few
career.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Inga, I mean, starting up is not for everyone. Like, I think that's definitely, it's super hard. Like, I don't want to downplay how difficult it is to start a business, especially a not tested business. Like, I guess, di ba, starting a business, kahit nga franchise lang yan, na meron ng literal playbook, no, na
Right, right.
kopyahin mo na lang, it's already hard. Lalo na yung, you don't even know if the idea will work, or may market ba, or something like that, no? So, I'm not saying it's for everyone, but I will say that, like, if this is something that interests you and you feel like you want to make a difference in the world, like, no, a few things. One, be mindful of your surroundings and the problems, I suppose. So, like all great solutions come from really big, important problems. And I think, a lot of us have the tendency to just kind of go through life the day to day without observing, the world and how you can maybe make it a better place, or what change you can actually affect in it, or what the problems and the struggles are. And the bigger those problems are, the more likely it is that other people share those problems and might be willing to pay for it. So, I think good startup ideas come from really good insights and good understanding of problems. So, the second thing I want to say is, if you want to start your own startup, definitely work for a startup. The startup industry is so hungry for talent. I know a lot of our listeners are tempted to find a job abroad, or mag-nursing na lang, and nothing wrong with all of those things. I'm just saying, like, there is like an interesting potential career kind of opportunity in the IT industry broadly. And also specifically, like for my thing, diba, I definitely want to plug like working for a Pinoy founded company, kasi we need that top talent to be working for us and our parang the solutions we're building, no? Um and like I guess maybe the third thing is sort of to set aside your notions or preconceived notions of sino ba yung pwede maging founder, or sino ba yung bagay sa IT, right? Like that's kind of old school now. We talked about how every kid should maybe learn a bit of programming in school. Like the the IT industry is so diverse, right? Like you'll find girly girls just as much as you'll find, hoodie guys, diba? Parang ganon. So people that are into sports, people that are into food and fashion and what have you. So, it's such a big, broad field, and you can find your place in it. Girl, guy, LGBTQ, like anyone, right? So, if you have the interest and of course, the patience to learn it, because it is, it does require skill to be able to participate meaningfully. So, that's probably kind of like my advice. Pero in terms of how to be me specifically, well, you can't be me. Pero I mean, as I said earlier, just go for it, just say yes, give it a try, and pero and do it maybe in small ways. As I said, even before I literally started nga as an intern, like not getting paid to do this, and kind of built up over time, like, and it's a lot easier to kind of pivot, as we like to say in startup speak, or kind of quit, diba, if you're not fully invested in something yet. Like right now I am, pero I guess how to be me, like I like to see opportunities, I like to explore, I like to say yes. I think even with building Kubo and the Bayanihan thing, it's really about always having an open mind to different partners, different opportunities, seeing what can happen, and like try have fun doing it, and
Right.
hopefully like that leads to something good. Pero sometimes it doesn't, and that's fine, right? So that's probably how to be me. Cool. Um,
Right, right. And our audience, as mentioned by Miss Katrina, I think, just exposure, look at the founders, look at their CTOs. That's also why we're doing this. It's just multiple exposure points for you. Try it out. An internship here, an internship there. Just listening to or finding mentors, or looking for
networking events when
networking
those are
events.
allowed
Yes.
again, diba?
And that's why you should always comment in our section box. You never know who is reading it and who will reply. So if you and girls, if the episode was meaningful to you, and you want to reach out to us, just please leave that in the comment section below if you're watching on YouTube, or you can message me as well if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and other platforms as well. All right. So before we end, any last shout outs and invites to future events, or anything that you want to plug in again?
Yeah, of course. Thank you again for having me on the show today. So we do have events at IdeaSpace and Kubo at least once or twice a week. So I think the best way to find out what's going on in the startup ecosystem is to join one of these events and to join our community of cuties. So so the way to do that is to follow us on social media at QBO Philippines, and to go to our website www.qbo.com.ph. So there's a sign up button there, join Kubo button on the website. And if you sign up, like it's absolutely free, by the way, to sign up. So if you're a regular community member, that means you can join a bunch of our events. Get access to like the latest sort of news on this what's gonna up in the startup industry, and a bunch of other kind of freebies. And if you're a startup, then that's a whole other world of like opportunities that are available to you. And again, it's all absolutely free. So please follow us on social at Kubo Philippines, or sign up on our website kubo.com.ph. And I guess last but not the least, Philippine Startup Week is coming up this November. So if you're Filipino or not Filipino, but interested in the Filipino startup ecosystem, do join that event. It's also another free thing, but also like a huge celebration of everything fantastic that's going on in the tech startup space.
Thank you so much, no? And all the links and what you mentioned, I'll also put it in the description box below, so you can also check that out and click and definitely sign up for that newsletter and event, right? And see you hopefully in November for that big Philippine Startup Weekend event.
That's right.
Thank you so much, audience, and we hope you had a good day. Bye, audience.
Bye, audience. Thank you.
And of course, if you like our content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe button, and notification bell.